Well, regarding the how to differentiate fragile from collapse or failed, it's a long debate which generated heat but no light. When we say collapsed or failed state, it means a state which is not capable of providing the very basic control, even in major urban centers. In the case of Yemen, the state is capable of controlling law and order in the capital and major urban centers. It has not reached yet to the stage of being totally failed, like in the case of Somalia or the cases of Liberia in West Africa. So it's still capable of maintaining law and order in very selective urban centers. That's why it is called fragile. Lisa Whedon is a distinguished scholar in this respect, and she argued that actually the term fragile state is actually generated by Washington. Any political entity that poses a threat to the American national security is being labeled fragile. The connection between the term and U.S. national security. Again, these classifications are not orthodox. I mean, you can expand and contract them. If I jump from here to you, Professor Said, about maybe non-state at all, actually, the Yemeni state is self-canceling state. It cancels itself in order to be able to maintain the survival of the regime. What I mean by this, the very basic solution is to strengthen the military and the police and state institutions to counterbalance the power of the tribes. Basic. If you have strong tribes, a weak state, if you strengthen the Yemeni military and the Yemeni security, you counterbalance the tribes. However, because the Yemeni political entity is so fragile, the military can pose threat to the regime. And Lisa Whedon here argues correctly that in the case of Yemen, state weakness is a question of will, political will. So in the case of Yemen, regime survival stands in contrast to state building. Which one of them? And that's why it leads to the so-called self-canceling state. We don't expand the state institution because it poses threat to the regime survival. The similarities of the so-called Arab Spring in the case of Yemen regarding women. In the beginning, especially the first month, especially January, February, March, undoubtedly the Yemeni social intifada provided voice and empowerment and a space for women to emerge. There are many female activists, actually, Yemeni activists. However, the situation has changed radically after 18th of March, when General Mohsen al-Ahmar, who was a conservative Wahhabist, he actually allocated his units to protect the protesters, but however, he insisted of dividing the female protesters from the male protesters in return of his protection. So again, it was a very progressive step in the first 3 months regarding the position of women in Yemen. However, in the last month, due to the intervention of this conservative Wahhabist military general again. But there are many similarities. I mean, the Yemeni youth were inspired by the Tunisian and Egyptian youth, undoubtedly. The slogan itself, "Ash-Sha'b yurid isqat an-nizam," is one of the interesting observations is that a statement was made by Sheikh Sadiq al-Ahmar, who is the head of Hashid Tribal Confederation. He said, "We will chase Saleh out of Sana'a bare feet." And I imagine this statement is borrowed from the dictionary of medieval political dictionary, which stands in sharp contrast to people want to topple down the regime. What we have in Yemen now is also a clash of generations. Youth who are oriented towards modernization and traditional tribal forces. And I think regarding the woman position, the youth camp, if we look at the camps today in Yemen, we have the youth camp, we have the tribal camp, which is the strongest, and we have the opposition political parties. I think in the case of the youth camp, the support for women empowerment is really strong. But the tribal camp is the strongest, which shapes the agenda. Regarding again the alternative, what are the alternatives after Saleh? If we look at the case of Tunisia and Egypt, the military took over and managing the transitional period. The biggest problem in Yemen is that there is no single state institution which is capable of carrying this period. It's the period itself. It's not the absence of alternative. Who will act as a bridge to stabilization? This is a serious problem in Yemen.
And General Ahmed doesn't have that.
Yeah, what we have now, we have General Mohsen Al-Ahmar, who is having his constituency, northern tribal areas, and we have Colonel Ahmed Saleh, the head of Republican Guards, the elite military units. So it's inter-elite tribal conflict somehow going on for the time being. I strongly believe that no change will take place in Sana'a without a green light from Riyadh. The Saudi Prince Turki Faisal made a statement in the 1990s which is illustrative. He said, in Riyadh, we get worried when things get too well or too bad in Yemen. It has to always remain on the edge, busy, inside. So any change in Yemen is related to changes in Riyadh. Actually, this is one of the main concerns. I imagine Yemen to Saudi Arabia is what Mexico to the US. It's a source of concern at the borders. Regarding the demographic picture, I don't know if I'm using the right contrast and comparison, but it's a source of concern for the following reasons: the demographic picture, the population growth, and it's a poor country. So when you have 25 millions along the borders, it's a major problem. The Saudis actually are thinking about constructing a barrier, which is going to be the longest wall. And not surprisingly, a German company is going to construct the wall. So the demographic picture is a threat. However, the main threat to the Saudis is related to the dispute over the Saudi-Yemeni borders. Actually, if you look at any map before the 1930, Yemen stretches all the way to Asir, Najran, Jizan, Asir, up there. Used to be a Yemeni territory. And then there was the Ta'if Treaty in 1934, and then they managed, the Saudis, through Saleh Corporation, to finalize the agreement in 2000 in Jeddah. So the Saudis are concerned a strong Yemen will demand territory. If Yemen is free of domestic violence, it will start looking outward. The Saudis cannot do anything about changing the demographic picture in Yemen. It's the Yemenis who should do something about changing the demographic picture in Yemen. It's a serious problem with the shortage of resources and population growth, but I don't know, not much actually is taken, not much action from the Yemeni government so far. So, yeah, serious problem. Another major problem for the Saudi is Al-Qaeda. There was a recent attack on the Saudi prince Mohammed bin Naif by a Saudi militant who was residing in Yemen. So it's a major source of threat to the Saudi national security, and also smuggling of illegal, including khat, is being actually transported to Saudi Arabia. Estimated business of $150 million khat per year crossing the borders. Multifaceted problem: smuggling, terrorism, and demographically. Yeah. Well, Saleh is, as mentioned, Saleh, he manages to dance on the heads of snakes. He's the only person who is capable, actually, of managing fragmented Yemen in the last decades. He is also serving the Saudi agenda very well. His adoption of politics of survival serves the Saudi interest. Keeping Yemen busy with conflicts and violence serves the Saudi policy of Yemen should be on the edge, busy. I think he's the best candidate in the eyes of Riyadh. That's why they keep supporting him until today. He serves the Saudi national interest much better than any other. Influential tribal leaders, and this is not only the case in Yemen, I think all over the Middle East, are not interested in taking presidential seats. They prefer to appoint someone who allows them to extract maximum benefits from the state without being involved in the management of the state. And this is, so if none of Al-Ahmar family, for example, which is the most influential tribal family, or Al-Shaykh from Berkeley, would be interested to run Yemen. They will not be able, it's complex to run a modern state. So they stay behind the scene. That's why Saleh is the only candidate for the time being. Yeah. For the last years, the EU have tried to convince the GCC, has tried to convince the GCC to accept Yemen membership, but they refuse totally. Not only because Yemen is poor, economically speaking, they are not happy with the idea of a republican system. Yemen is the only republican system in the neighborhood. They are not happy with the fact that there is something called parliament and elections. So to accept Yemen into the GCC, it has to be a monarchy. I mean, if Yemen is an imamate system today, from the imamate time, it would be a member of the GCC. It's much more than the economic. Again, you have the Zaidi Shiites in Yemen. And this, if you look at the borders with Saudi Arabia, there is Ismaili along the borders. And the Saudis are very concerned joining the GCC, the Shiite community of Yemen, with the Shiite community of the Saudi Arabia, and the rest of the GCC can create a threat to them. So it's the security threat from sectarianism and the idea of republicanism. They're not happy with it. It's just the most likely scenario, even if I don't have a crystal ball, the most likely scenario is that his vice president, Abdurrab Hadi, will take over the transitional period. And I think the most likely scenario is Saleh would be given a nice villa to rest somewhere in Dubai. We heard that he doesn't want to rest in Saudi Arabia. He wants to be in a much better place than Riyadh. So it's most likely Dubai, where he can drink and have life. So I think it has to do is saving face. His return. He's a tribal man. Saleh is a tribal man. He wanted to prove that I did not escape like Ben Ali, because Ben Ali is there. If he stayed there, it means he's facing the same destiny of Ben Ali. He wanted to return back to show that I am back, but he will disappear from the arena with dignity. بالكرامة القبلية. Thank you. Pleasure. Thank you.